My name is Juan Cartegena. I am born and raised right here in Jersey City, Margaret Haig Hospital, PS number 5, Ferris High School, and still raising hell everywhere.
Still lives here.
And still live here,
That's right.
downtown Jersey City. But I am very, very happy that these organizations, the ones who are sponsoring this event, especially Jersey City Puerto Rican Heritage Parade and Festival, PACO, and of course our sponsor here, NJCU, are looking at this issue. In fact, there should be no doubt in your mind why the Puerto Rican Festival, Heritage Festival, is even having this conversation, is because, in my opinion, every organization that has the name Puerto Rican in it better be talking about this issue. Each and every one of them. Better look for ways to engage our community and look for ways that we can actually take action for what is going on in the island of Puerto Rico. To understand where Puerto Rico is today is to try to get a better handle on understanding of the legal framework of the relationship between the United States and Puerto Rico. And to understand all of that, you have to recognize that Puerto Rico was part of the territories acquired by the United States at the end of 1898, at a time in which the viewpoint of the United States towards Puerto Rico, Cuba, the Philippines, was as racist as you can imagine. Those people were backwards. They were dark. They were backwards. They can't control themselves or have any kind of ability to self-govern themselves. And they happen to be located strategically in the Caribbean at the point in which it's perfect for military purposes. In that context, Puerto Rico was prized. The unfortunate thing is that whatever military reasons the United States have for taking the island in 1898 don't really apply today. The real question is, what use exactly would Puerto Rico have from a military perspective? I suspect almost none. Second, it has been developed over time that the Commonwealth status of Puerto Rico was a compact that was created in 1952 as a result of a constitution passed by Puerto Rico, in which they finally passed their own constitution, was able to elect their first Puerto Rican native-born governor, and the United States Congress approved this arrangement, including this constitution, and told the whole world, especially at the United Nations, that Puerto Rico cannot be considered a colony because it is self-governing. It has autonomy. It has control over its local affairs. Of course, it didn't elaborate the fact that there's other parts of Puerto Rico's government that are completely dominated by the United States in terms of who we can trade with, how merchandise gets onto the island through the ports, which ships are allowed to do so, how the currency and immigration status are all controlled by the United States. But put that aside for a second. Even if we have been, over the last 50 some odd years, or 60 some odd years, convinced that Puerto Rico's Commonwealth status has a level of autonomy and therefore the United States will always respect it, that actually changed. And it changed as early as just 2 or 3 months ago. Because for the first time in a court, in the Supreme Court of the United States, in a long time, many years have gone by, which the last time the Supreme Court even talked about Puerto Rico was in the insular cases of the 1920s. And those cases actually said that Puerto Rico is, you know, part of the United States in a foreign sense. It's like domestic but foreign. I mean, a complete contradiction of terms. But I want you to fast forward to what was said by the United States in the court in the case of Sanchez Villa, which is Puerto Rico versus Sanchez Villa. It's a complicated criminal law case in which Puerto Rico was trying to assert its authority to actually prosecute a handful of Puerto Ricanos who were convicted of carrying arms, guns. But the defense said you're not allowed to because those individuals were already prosecuted by the US government in federal court. And Puerto Rico is not a sovereign, it's not a state, and only states are permitted to get this exception of double jeopardy. Long story short, the issue of the colonial relationship between Puerto Rico and the United States was front and center. Puerto Rico is asserting its authority to do so. The federal court had to decide whether it can. In the arguments before the Supreme Court, the United States government literally said the following to Sonia Sotomayor, Justice Sonia Sotomayor. She asked, wait, isn't it true that as a result of the compact of 1952, in the Constitution of Puerto Rico, that the days in which Congress can actually undo the laws passed in Puerto Rico that is undo them, reject them, those days are over. And the answer from the United States Attorney was, you're mistaken, Justice. Congress still has plenary authority over Puerto Rico. Whatever Congress gave can take it away. This was said only in January of this year. And for the first time, the facade that the United States has been telling the world that it's not really a colony because it has self-autonomy was revealed. The emperor has no clothes. The second case that before the Supreme Court that also dictates the question about colonial relationship is the case of La Quiebra Criolla. So Puerto Rico, needing to get an out, needing a structured way to deal with the debt, passed its own bankruptcy law. Of course, as soon as it passed it, it was challenged in court by the creditors. And they have a lot of resources, a lot of money to pay lawyers. By the way, la verdad es que yo soy abogado y me apena decir esto. But the only people going to get rich out of this mess are lawyers. Trust me on this. Lawyers for, lawyers against. Private lawyers going to make a bundle of money in the next several years. They tell actually the lawyers that, the lawyers came into court and actually stopped the law, La Quiebra Criolla, Puerto Rico's own version of bankruptcy. That case, Puerto Rico versus Franklin Trust, is also before the Supreme Court. Both cases will be decided anytime between now and likely June 30th. Last, there's a legal vacuum. To understand why Puerto Rico has not been able to get itself out of this mess is to understand the fact that the laws that would have enabled it to seek bankruptcy protection were amended in the 1980s with no documentation as to why, literally no documentation, it was done in Congress, why this was done, and it was amended to exempt Puerto Rico from the provision that would allow it to go into bankruptcy court and assert some level of autonomy. Now, in a bankruptcy proceeding, what it basically means is that when you owe too much money, you find a way to use your money to continue to pay off your debt, but you recognize you're not going to be able to pay it all off. So some people who got the bonds and are expecting full payment will have to take less. They'll get paid just less. And it'll be structured. It'll be orderly. In the absence of bankruptcy protection, there is no order. There's actually chaos. And all these lawsuits are going to be multiplied every time there's a default. Next thing you know, creditors are going to sue each other to be first in line to get paid. So all these issues are coming to the fore. It is quite possible that Congress can create a stay. In other words, they can stop all the current lawsuits and any future lawsuits and put an end to this mess, this chaos, and also pass its own bankruptcy laws. But the last version that we saw out of Congress, at least out of the House, would do so at the expense of any kind of dignity for Puerto Rico. Because it literally says we'll create an oversight financial control board. They call it an oversight board. They should be calling it financial control. And it's a very onerous way to actually take over and literally have a body of only 5, some versions have 7 people on it, most of them from the United States, not living or working in Puerto Rico, deciding which laws can be accepted and which budgets shall be approved, and whether Puerto Rico is permitted to just try to help itself out of this mess. There's enough blame in this mess to go around, right? I'm not saying that the government of Puerto Rico son inocentes. There was a lot of real ridiculous policies and judgments that were made by Puerto Rico's government. And that's of all parties. They used debt, loans, to cover holes in their budget. They started creating other mechanisms to actually get more debt, to get more loans. Some of those other mechanisms, like COFINA, can be, in my opinion, challenged whether or not they're even legally done. So part of this debt may actually be unpayable because it's illegally acquired. In international law, that's called odious debt. So where does this all leave us? To turn now to civic engagement. Well, it's 3 words: Congress, Congress, and Congress.
That's right. That's right.
That's all you have to know. Congress has plenary authority over all of its territories. What makes Puerto Rico unique is because it's considered by law an unincorporated territory of the United States. Part of, but not exactly part of, the United States. What makes Puerto Rico unique among other territories that eventually became states is that at the time they became states, they were populated by mostly, the majority or the plurality were mostly American citizens who went to live in those territories. Alaskas of the world, the Hawaiis of the world. They outnumbered the native Hawaiians or the native Alaskans. So they started petitioning for statehood. Puerto Rico is one of those few territories in the United States in which you didn't see a whole bunch of gringos going to Puerto Rico saying, I'm gonna live here and I wanna be a state. Al contrario. Although, from what I hear in Puerto Rico, there's a whole bunch now going down there to buy land. But you didn't have that same dynamic. And as a result, Congress holds the keys. So why would the Republican leaders of Congress consistently say that we're not prepared to pass a law to give Puerto Rico its own structured way out of this mess? It's because they have been taught to say the following words: no bailout. Puerto Rico is not asking for a bailout. Puerto Rico is not asking for a monetary figure to help it get out of this mess. Puerto Rico is simply asking for a structured way in a court of law to pay off everybody it can with what little money is coming in. But they continue to repeat the words no bailout because the Republicans are very good at messaging. They're very good at this. It doesn't have to be true. It doesn't have to be backed up by facts. It's just you repeat it over and over and people believe it. And the reason why they're repeating is because the hedge funds are a very powerful lobby in Washington, D.C. And they have convinced the Republican leaders of Congress that if you permit bankruptcy, we will get less money. And if you allow that, we have less money. So greed drives is a big driver of how they're addressing their lobbying efforts behind this, and the Republicans are listening to this. The Boricua vote would now hopefully become the civic engagement response, right? I'm going to ask the panel, and I'm sure they're going to tell me whether the vote by itself is the only thing we have to look at. I'm sure they have their opinions about whether or not we need to do a lot more than just voting, like other forms of engagement, like other forms of putting this issue face and front and center in people's faces, like other forms of takeovers, like other forms of civil disobedience, like other forms of outrage. Outrage. Because you cannot sit back and allow this to happen to our people without recognizing there's too many people who are making money off of this situation. And the United States and Congress can't just sit back and let this thing happen. If the banks of Wall Street were too big to fail, why isn't Puerto Rico too big to fail? So, let me end with 3 points. The Boricua vote is very, very important to this dynamic. But the Boricua vote has to be understood in the context in which it's being developed. With so many thousands, hundreds of thousands of eventually people coming into the United States, we cannot assume, those of us who've lived here for a long time in the United States, or those of us who are born here, cannot make the mistake of assuming that all we have to do is just talk to them, and they'll register to vote, and they'll vote tomorrow. Because las elecciones aquí son diferentes que las elecciones allá. Elections are run differently in Puerto Rico. I had Jimmy Torres Vélez over in New York. I think, Jose, you were at the presentation. I mean, he has wonderful slides, caravanas, you know, the real trucks that go down to the streets of towns of Puerto Rico, take over the whole, stop all the traffic. That's how people go to vote. That's how people get mobilized to vote. And we don't do that here. And over there, Puerto Rico, the voting day is a full working holiday. Well, we don't do that here. And everybody's encouraged to vote because for some people, voting means whether you're going to keep your job or not keep your job. Well, we don't do it exactly that way here. And we have so many different elections. You cannot assume that these points that you want to raise with Puerto Ricanos are going to work. Second, registering people to vote isn't by itself the only thing we have to do. We have to make sure they can actually get to vote on election day. And with so many new voters, there are estimates that they're going to try to register 200,000 new voters in Central Florida alone. That's new registrations. Could you imagine the Hudson County Board of Elections trying to handle 200,000 new registration forms? Se cae. I should know, I sued them once. They can't handle this mess. They can't handle any kind of major challenge like that. That's what we're dealing with. We had to get them into the polls. And last question, but this is for my panelists. And as many times I've been invited to come to these conversations and share some of these thoughts about the legal cases, because this is what I love to do. And those two Supreme Court cases, one of those cases I actually worked on in the amicus brief. But the other question that's involved in this is that there's a lot of individuals, really, really hardworking activists and others and leaders, who are basically saying, we are not going to be able to solve the fiscal crisis of Puerto Rico unless we solve the colonial problem in Puerto Rico. And then on the other hand, there's a bunch of other leaders who are basically saying almost the opposite. What's unifying our response is the fact that we're not going to sit here and try to solve the issue of statehood, Commonwealth status, or improved Commonwealth status and independence. And what's the unifying voice is more important to deal with the economic fiscal crisis and later on deal with the colonial crisis. I'm not here to try to answer those questions for you, but those questions are front and center. The questions about the colonial relationship and the question about how we deal with it. So the crisis has effects in multiple areas. You've been seeing a lot of this information. I'm not going to repeat all of it for you because a lot of it has been talked about recently. The population decline has been immense, right? The population decline has gone from 3.8 million Puerto Ricanos living in the island in 2000 to 3.54 million living on the island in 2014, with projections that only 3.39 will live on the island by 2020. In 2016, the American Community Survey of the United States Census demonstrated that every city had population loss in Puerto Rico except Guarabo and Toa Alta. And Toa Alta's increase was only like 0.1%. Guarabo was about 3% increase. So the island is losing people by left and right. The schools, well over 150 schools have been closed as a result of budget cuts. The roads, now at least 2 highways are owned. Their revenues owned by private interests in Puerto Rico. Energy, the cost of energy in Puerto Rico skyrocketed. It's always been higher than in the United States. But that's even worse now because of PREPA, La Autoridad, the energy company that runs all the equivalent of PSE&G here in New Jersey. Employment, the unemployment rate was now 11.9% as recently as January of this year, 12% unemployment. Retail sales, we don't expect growth on retail sales in the next 2 or 3 years because of new taxes. Puerto Rico has 11.5% sales tax, 11.5. No place with an American flag above it has such a high sales tax. Don't you dare tell Puerto Ricanos on the island that they're not trying to raise taxes. They're not trying to do enough to deal with the problem. They have the highest sales tax of anywhere within the 50 states or any territory of the United States. The retail sales fell from October 2014 to October 2015, even though there was a 3%. It fell by 3%, even though there was a drop in gasoline prices. There's a wonderful young man, I'm sure you've already seen him either on the internet or on TV, or you may have heard of him. An incredible talent named Lin-Manuel Miranda. Yeah, give it up for him. Lin-Manuel Miranda, who is the principal playwright, Pulitzer Prize winner, MacArthur Genius Award winner of the play Hamilton, and before that, In the Heights. And he has been an incredible force to listen to on this issue. But you see, we're gonna need a lot more than just Lin-Manuel. When we were all involved in Vieques, to get the Navy out of Vieques, we had a lot more than just one celebrity. We had a bunch of them. When we were all involved in making sure the Navy stopped bombing Vieques and got out of Vieques, we made sure we were speaking for all of us. The level of unity around Vieques, I have not seen ever since, except for the release of Oscar Lopez Rivera, in which the entire island is unified. The entire island is unified for that. And now the entire island is unified in a way to try to say, we need a structured way out. We're not asking for a handout. We need a structured way out of bankruptcy or other forms of court-ordered and orderly ways to deal with this, not the chaos of multiple lawyers with private attorneys getting rich.
And we're in a presidential year, and it's both the advantage and the disadvantage of being, hitting peak in this crisis in Puerto Rico in this particular year, where we both have the biggest opportunity to be able to press people in Congress and, certain parties. But we also have to compete with all the other issues that people are kind of trying to put front and center. When you look at what the behavior right now of new arrivals is politically, they're not necessarily understanding how to connect if they're politically interested, if they're interested in being engaged politically. They don't know how to connect. The language issue is real. The language issue is real, and if people are not hearing information in Spanish, they're also not kind of tuning in. And for most people, and this actually, one thing that was kind of across the board is that, yes, the debt in Puerto Rico was sort of emotionally important to people, but it was not within their 3 top issues that would get them to vote for a candidate or not vote for a candidate. So even when we get to the point of saying that a candidate has to have a position on Puerto Rico that that we could theoretically agree is going to improve the situation in Puerto Rico, this is still, you can still have candidates that kind of ignore that, and they're still going to get voted on economic issues and housing issues.
That's a
and
very
education
important point.
issues. So this is something that, the level of education that we have to do with people to get them to the point where they are even bringing that up. I mean, that's a lot of work. And the thing is, with the people that have been in the mainland U.S. for over 20 years, they pretty much said, we don't agree with a bailout of Puerto Rico, and they kind of phrased it that way too. That's how they see it. They said the Puerto Rican government is corrupt. They got us in this mess. It's their fault, and we should not be bailing out Puerto Rico.
Puerto Ricans in the U.S., we have to talk about our role in the status of Puerto Rico. Because if there's going to be a vote on status of Puerto Rico, do the Puerto Ricans in the U.S. participate in that? The United States talks about American citizens in Puerto Rico, but that population that Juan talked about, there are like 80,000 North Americans. There are thousands of Dominicans. There are thousands of people from Latin America. So no todo puertorriqueño en Puerto Rico. And we don't want to be like Hawaii. When Hawaii became a state, Hawaii was only 18% Hawaiian. And they never had a participation as a nationality in the future of their country. But we can make a difference. We can make a difference economically. We can make sure that the government gives to Puerto Rico goes for sustainable economic development on the island, not for corporations that take all the money out of Puerto Rico and bring it back here. Puerto Rico, regardless of whatever status, is going to have to develop a sustainable, self-sufficient economy.
We should definitely be more engaged with our community. And I say that as a politician because I miss it. Prior to me being a councilman and involved in politics, I was born in Margaret Hay, living downtown Jersey City on 2nd Street. As I spoke to David Cruz in an interview, our tradition is dying out within our city, and we need to regroup. And it's when we regroup that we can fuel moving forward to our country, that we can have advocates strong for our country. So we need to definitely look at ourselves and say, rather than to not be engaged with someone because I don't like you, let's be engaged for the betterment of our community, for the betterment of our race.